Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Jays Fifth Down Podcast, special draft preview episode here. I'm your host, Jay, and I'm here today with Cade of the NFL Study Hall Podcast. He's joining me today to preview the Houston Texans draft and what they might do. We have no idea what they're going to do with that number 2 overall pick, so we'll talk about that. And Aaron Rodgers finally traded to the Jets after what seemed like forever. Cade, the trade finally happened officially, so now he's on the Jets, but make sure you guys, check us out, subscribe. Make sure you check out Cade's show there. He does a great job on that. So make sure you check him out and you check us out here on YouTube and every podcast platform. Cade, let's jump right into it, man. What do you think?
Yes, sir.
We knew it was going to happen, but it finally happened.
Yeah, it finally happened. And I want to go on record that if anybody saw a tweet I posted out about 2 months ago saying the Jets should go after Aaron Rodgers, it's like one of the only correct predictions I've ever gotten when it comes to trade rumors. So I'm feeling pretty good about that. But yeah, this was the clear and obvious plan from the get-go for the New York Jets. You go out and get Allen Lazard. You go out and get some of the other guys that Rodgers requested. They have completely had a top 5 defense last year. In my opinion, this was a second-round playoff team if they had any type of quarterback, and even more so if Breece Hall was healthy the entire year. In my opinion, this is a great trade for both teams. The Packers were obviously in the middle of a rebuilding season, even with Aaron Rodgers at the helm. I did not consider them to be a great team with Aaron Rodgers. Now they can complete that rebuild with draft picks, give Jordan Love some help. They'll probably go for a wide receiver at somewhere. I think they have the 13th overall pick with this trade now, and then the Jets go back down to 15. So they can still get a good receiver for Jordan Love. The Jets right now, it is Super Bowl or bust for them for at least the next 2 seasons. I would say they go after this year. Rodgers should be able to stick around another year. So for the next 2 years, this only works if the Jets win a Super Bowl, and I believe they have put themselves in the absolute best position to do so.
Yeah, I agree. This is, like you said, it's Super Bowl or bust. I mean, the roster, you have a great defense. You have playmakers outside, and they have a good offensive line. They're going to add to that, I'm sure, in the draft as well. So it's, it's set up. So now you have that quarterback you've been needing. So we'll see if they can, make it happen. So we'll see about that. But yeah, the trade officially went through. So now Aaron Rodgers is a New York Jet. So end of an era in Green Bay. But now we'll switch over to the Texans, man. Your team you cover. Now they have the 2nd overall pick in the draft, Cade, and nobody knows what the Texans are going to do with that pick. So can you just talk about the news kind of swirling around that, the quarterback stuff? And I know you've been hearing a lot of rumors going around lately. So
it all kind of started, actually. This is all the Panthers' fault, by the way, because when they initially made that trade with the Chicago Bears, everyone was pretty convinced that CJ Stroud was the man, right? I mean, that seemed like who their guy was, right? Well, as the Texans right now, you're pretty much going to get handed Bryce Young at the number 2 overall pick, right? Well, then the talk of the Panthers started leaning more towards Bryce Young, which forced the Texans to start changing their plans a little bit. Now that right now it's almost unanimously decided that Bryce Young will go number 1 overall this draft. Is there potential that he doesn't? Sure, but 90% of the population is thinking that Bryce Young will go first right now, which leaves the Texans with the number 2 overall pick, and they have the option to go with CJ Stroud. Well, some other things have been going around that CJ Stroud isn't necessarily as pro-ready, or I guess he doesn't have as much star power potential as maybe a Will Levis or an Anthony Richardson, or you can wait because they also have the number 12 overall pick. And one of those guys might still be there, or if not, Hendon Hooker, who I've also seen a name get thrown around lately. You could go for a Will Anderson Jr. at 2 and then wait for your QB at 12. So that's been the whole deal, because CJ Stroud, ever since the Panthers kind of stopped liking him, no one's really sure how good he actually can be now. I saw a little bit of a test, that the IQ test. I don't know if you saw that, Jaden, but the IQ test that went around, CJ Stroud was like 18th percent, or like he was the worst of all the quarterbacks that went around. I think that's not a hoax, but there's no way he's that low IQ when you're that good at Ohio State University, at a Big Ten school, underneath that coaching staff. I think that plays in a little bit more to the football side of things than a simple test will. So that honestly didn't concern me as much. But the fact that the Panthers were set on him and now have switched over to Bryce Young is food for thought for the rest of the teams in the NFL. For me, I'm going with CJ Stroud. I don't care what anybody says. None of the other quarterbacks, in my opinion, outside of maybe Hendon Hooker, who has more of the injury side of him that I'm a little bit nervous about now. If Hendon Hooker had stayed healthy the entire season, this conversation would have been completely different. But now how he's coming off that injury, I'm a little bit nervous about him. CJ Stroud has the best arm of anyone outside of Bryce Young. Like I said, I told you before, Bryce Young's my man. Out of everyone else, CJ Stroud has the best arm. He has played in a NFL-style system where he can both run, but he is a true pocket passer. He knows how to throw the big arm. He knows how to work with running backs. In my opinion, he has seen the best of the best in Ohio State. For some reason, people think that is why he won't make a good quarterback for a bad team in the NFL, because their offensive lines are going to be weaker, their wide receivers aren't going to be as good, and they're going to need a lot more help to do it themselves. In my opinion, I think it's on the ownership to get the team better around him. If you have a quarterback who is that comfortable on a good team, he shouldn't make the transition that hard. So if you're the Texans, you need to be working on getting him help if you can nab him. So in my opinion, if the plan goes as everyone says it has, with Bryce Young going number 1 overall, I think you take that option of CJ Stroud. At number 12, you are going to be given Jackson Smith-Njigba, who was CJ Stroud's teammate at Ohio State, right? That's a match made in heaven. Yeah. Now, way back in the day, I don't think people thought it was as important to grab quarterbacks and wide receivers from the same school. But recently, with Jalen Hurts and Devontae Smith, with Tua Tagovailoa and Jalen Waddle, and with Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase, that has been completely thrown out the window. Teams are looking for relationships like that. And you can grab arguably the number 1 wide receiver of this wide receiver class in 2023 and a top 2 quarterback in this class from the exact same school, going to play in the South when they are used to playing in the North, in an indoor stadium, in a team that is desperate for young talent on a decent offensive line in a weaker division. In my opinion, that is the go-to option for the Texans right now. Obviously you could have backup plans, but I am not second-guessing this idea of grabbing both CJ Stroud and Smith-Njigba from Ohio State University. That is my go-to. Now, here's the off chance that doesn't happen. Yeah. Let's just say the Panthers go back on their original intentions and take CJ Stroud first. Well, then you're basically handed Bryce Young. If I'm given Bryce Young, I actually wouldn't go after Jackson Smith-Njigba. I would go after Quentin Johnson from TCU. And here's why. We already got Robert Woods this offseason. Now, Robert Woods is a phenomenal wide receiver. He has struggled a little bit at the number 1 spot on his teams, considerably last year when he decided to when he was put into the 1 wide receiver at the Tennessee Titans. And he did worse in 17 games than he did the previous year when he was number 2 wide receiver behind Cooper Kupp, and he only played 9 games. In the year he was hurt as the number 2 wide receiver, he did better than the year he was number 1 and more games. To me, Robert Woods is not a true great number 1 wide receiver. So you need someone to come in and play a different role. He's also a little bit more of a slot wide receiver. He's not a big wideout kind of guy like Cooper Kupp was. Yeah. Quentin Johnson is 6'4", with, I believe he had the longest wingspan of this draft class. He is a monster on the outside who can go up and get balls. If that is your deep man, and Nico Collins on the Houston Texans is also 6'4". Nico Collins and Quentin Johnson on the outside with Robert Woods demanding the slot positions, that is a wide receiver tree I can work with if I'm Bryce Young. But again, I'm willing to give that up if I can get the dynamic of CJ Stroud and Smith-Njigba. So in my opinion, there are two clear routes for the Houston Texans. Stroud, Smith-Njigba, Young, Quentin Johnson. And to me, I'm not worried about defense right now. In my opinion, you don't need the defense as much. Defensive line, you're thinking about getting Will Anderson Jr. Well, Jerry Hughes just had 9 sacks, the most he's had in almost a decade. The secondary, which I've seen some mock drafts go out there that have the Houston Texans taking a cornerback as the 12th overall pick, which absolutely blows my mind, considering our 3rd overall pick last year was Derek Stingley Jr., who's still a fine cornerback, and we picked up Jalen Petrie, who had 5 interceptions last year and absolutely dominated that backfield. The Houston Texans were 10th in the NFL in passing yards allowed per game, and I want to say top 7 in turnovers last year. They had a fine defensive secondary, so no need to go there. Jerry Hughes, Jonathan Gennard was supposed to have a better year. He didn't, but there's still potential there. And then we also picked up Sheldon Rankins from the New York Jets this year, right? So we've done enough on the defensive line. If you want to go defense, I'd go secondary or I'd go linebacker, because our rushing defense has been trash, and that usually starts with that second line of defense, not necessarily the first. So you can go linebacker. That's perfectly fine. Maybe go after Will Anderson Jr. Maybe go after there's some other guys out there who I've heard their names for. Nolan Smith from Georgia is the other guy that I've heard. So you can go after that, guys, if you want. But the number one thing we need is a quarterback, and the quarterback's going to need help. So I'd say quarterback, wide receiver. You have the 33rd overall pick, which is the 2nd pick in the 2nd round. That is where I would go linebacker. So those of those top 3, the rest of the draft, you can go offensive line, you can go defensive line, you can go more wide receivers, you can go secondary, you can go whatever you want. But for me, it's got to go quarterback first, wide receiver at 12, linebacker at 33.
Cool. Yeah, I agree with that. I saw some mock drafts that had them at pick number 12 instead of getting a receiver, having them taking lineman. One of them I saw them taking Broderick Jones from Georgia. If they were to make a move like that, would you be opposed to that?
Say that again. Which move?
I saw a mock draft where they take Broderick Jones from Georgia at that number 12 pick. Would you be opposed to them taking a offensive lineman there instead of a receiver?
No. And this is me going to be a complete hypocrite, because if you've known me at all, I've been begging for offensive linemen on the Houston Texans basically since I was born. We have not had an offensive line in ages. The reason I'm saying no this time is because you just made Lermy Tunsil the highest paid offensive lineman in NFL history, and you also traded for Shaq Mason. Plus, you drafted Kenyon Green last year as a 1st-round overall pick, and you have a young Titus Howard on that line as well. You have some young guys. You've used picks in the past, and all of your pay right now is already going to the offensive line. There's got to be something else that's on this offense that can have. And by the way, Davis Mills, our quarterback last year, threw 15 interceptions. I don't believe those were all on the offensive line. I think he was just a bad quarterback last year. So,
yeah.
I'm never opposed to offensive linemen. I think there are bigger needs on this offense, though.
Yeah, I can agree. Yeah, and like you said, it's a very deep receiver class. It's solid. It's really solid. You got Jackson Smith and Jiba, and then it's like, Quinn Johnson, Zay Flowers, and then, after that, but Jordan Addison as well. So now moving into that, the 3rd, 4th round, into the middle part of the draft, where you see them possibly attacking there.
Like I said, at this point, your defensive second front has been so bad lately. An outside offensive lineman, an edge who can play linebacker and defensive edge, I would take any day. There's a few guys at the 2nd overall pick that I'm interested in. Drew Sanders from Arkansas had 103 tackles last year, as well as 9.5 sacks. So he's the guy like a Micah Parsons type player who can sit back in the linebacker. I mean, obviously I'm not going to compare anybody to Micah Parsons, but just that type of player. And then also Jack Campbell from Iowa could also be a core linebacker himself, who had 125 tackles last season. Someone who can really stand in there and take a running back, because with having to play Derrick Henry twice a year, it's just, I'm so sick of us. We allowed 170 rushing yards a game last year. It's just, I'm just tired of it. So that is where I think the Houston Texans need to hit the hardest in the later drafts. Obviously, then I would go with an offensive lineman, like 3rd, 4th, 5th overall pick. At that point, you would basically have a good player at every position. And I am more about getting a solid player at every position rather than just stacking one of those spots. That's what I feel like I don't really need a cornerback, because we just stacked the cornerback position with Jalen Petrie and Derek Stingley last year, who proved their point, and our offense was one of the worst in the leagues. Why would we need to continue to go to a spot that we did well at last year when we are bottom of the pack in these other areas? So I think you basically just need to hit every spot you need. And in my opinion, that is quarterback, wide receiver, linebacker. After that, defensive line, offensive line. The spots you do not need, I think, are cornerback and running back. Running back, we also just got Devin Singletary. So there's 2 running backs right there we don't need. We got 2 solid secondary men. Let's go get the other players.
That's it. It's like, why stack a position that you are already solidified at? I'm quite familiar with how teams do that. My Atlanta Falcons have done that a lot in the past couple of years. It's very irritating. But yeah, it's a fun time of year, man. Like I said, nobody really, truly knows what the Texans will do with that pick at number 2. And I've been seeing, now I saw this lately too, and I really hope it doesn't happen. But Will Levis has been getting a lot of momentum lately. And some even have him going to Houston at number 2. Cade, dude, I don't want to see that, man. For y'all, I don't want to see it for the second NFL. I don't want to see that, man.
There has been something to be said about trying to get that guy who everyone is trying to predict has the potential. Maybe they didn't crazy prove themselves in college. Maybe they didn't have a solid team around them in college, but you feel like they have the potential to go crazy in the NFL. Players who have proven themselves in college have had more of a tendency to prove themselves in the NFL. This is why I was crazy and confused why Lamar Jackson went number 32 overall pick in his draft class. The man just won a Heisman Trophy. People acknowledge him to be an amazing quarterback. Why wouldn't he bring that to the NFL? That was one pick. Like, I thought Lamar Jackson should have been the number 1 or 2 quarterback in that draft class. And he was number 5. I was super confused by that year. You look at Brock Purdy last year, Mr. Irrelevant, right? Well, people obviously heard about his story, but he dominated at Iowa State. He was phenomenal, and that is a D1 team. Will Levis has potential, but let's be honest, he was at Kentucky. That is a successful program, and I think his team was just over 500 last year. He couldn't bring them out of that pack. Florida, Anthony Richardson, potential come out and they beat Utah. They beat a top 10 team. They have all the momentum, and they turn out to be a 500 team, and they can't even beat Florida State. There's guys who are just put in positions in college who didn't rise up to the occasion that I don't feel like would rise up to the occasion in the NFL. CJ Stroud, Bryce Young, the Brock Purdy's of the world, Hendon Hooker. Like I said, if he wasn't hurt, this whole conversation is different. In my opinion, I have my 2 quarterbacks at CJ Stroud and Bryce Young. My 3rd quarterback in this year's draft class is Hendon Hooker. He proved himself the best in college. Why wouldn't he do that in the NFL when he gets healthy?
Yeah, he did. He sure did. He was at one point just tearing it up, bro, at Tennessee. And that was, as far as the offense, he had Jalen Hyde and those guys, but dude, he was lining it up. He's his mind, he's the way he processes things. He's a great quarterback. Now he is older, but and he's got the injury issues. So that's like you said, completely different combo we're having if he stays healthy. So, but yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens there. Definitely interested to see what happens there with the Texans, and with it's like, how important, man, is it for the Texans to really hit on this class, bro? Like, I feel like, to me, this they got to hit with this draft class, because they really do,
and they really do. And granted, they've got more draft picks in the future. The Houston Texans have done an excellent job bringing in draft capital. So if they don't hit this year, they can hit in the future. But the reason they got to hit this year is because this is one of the times where their division has been the weakest. Tennessee is on the decline. The Colts are in the dumps. The Jacksonville Jaguars have got the division, no problem, right? But to start climbing the ranks in your own division and to hit an AFC that was surprisingly weak last year. We had the AFC on a pedestal like crazy last year. And so many teams didn't hit the mark. We had the number 7 team at the Miami Dolphins, I think barely made it in at 10-7. That's a normal year for a playoff team, right? Like we thought everyone was going to be like 12-4 in the entire AFC, and it just didn't happen. The Houston Texans have a chance to take over most of the teams in their division with an easy schedule last year. I think they have the third, based on last year's records, I think the Texans have like the third easiest schedule coming up. Plus, a coaching staff is a brand new coach in DeMeco. You could see a team based on this draft class be the team for the Houston Texans and the ones that fans love for the next 5 years. No problem. This is the draft class where you solidify your future. If this doesn't hit, no one's going to want to come to the Texans. It's just that simple because once you establish the team, other free agents want to come to you.
Yeah.
And so if the Texans can establish themselves as a great head coach, a young team with a good quarterback, and a culture that wants to win, because granted, that has not been in Houston in years. A winning culture or a winning mentality has not been there. I saw a glimmer of it last year when we decided to beat the Colts in the last game of the season. Hadn't seen that amount of fire in Houston in a long time. I think DeMeco Ryans is going to bring it. I think CJ Stroud, whoever is quarterback, if they can put it on their backs to lead this team to be a leader for your team, I think we can get other linebackers, other defensive men. Like there was huge talk this offseason that Javon Hargrave would be a high name for the Houston Texans. Never happened. Why? Guarantee you Javon Hargrave didn't want to come to Houston. He would rather go to San Francisco, right? But when you can establish yourself as a team on the come up, I think guys would like to make a fresh start with Houston. You give it 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, bro. That's how it is. And, the Texans, Deshaun Watson some years ago, they were making noise, man. They were winning, games in the playoffs, went to the AFC Championship game one year. Had a big lead against Kansas City. They blew it. It's like.
Don't remind me.
You're going to be reminded at some point.
I'm reminded every year.
So, but when since then, it's just been like you said, they've just been diving down. So you hope it's like this is the year where they just really make it right. They hit it. They, like you said, new coach, new staff. You get a new leader in there at the quarterback spot, whoever it is, just to change the tone, set the tone for the team and the franchise. That's why I'm hoping to have this for my team. I want our team to set the tone. And just set a new culture. Like, hey, we're going to go out here and be competitive. We're going to win football games. We're going to be physical. Like, hey, we might not win, but we're going to go out and compete for 4 quarters. You just want to see some fight, right? You just want to see some fight.
Yeah, and there's a difference I'd like to point out between winning a season and winning a draft. The Texans could win this draft and go 6-11 next year, go 7-10 next year, but still win the draft. Winning your draft doesn't necessarily mean you make the playoffs. For the Atlanta Falcons, I think it's different because you guys actually have a chance to win your division. I think the Jacksonville Jaguars have my division taken care of. I want to see the coaching staff put a fire in this team, get this team amped up. The energy on the field has to be different. Will that come to winning more games? Absolutely. I expect my team with a good draft class to come out of this season 6-11 at minimum. I'm expecting us to come out 6-11 to 8-9. I think a good draft class can make that happen. So it's not necessarily a playoff team, but it's a team that establishes a winning culture that can get more guys on your team to become that playoff team.
Yeah. Establish the culture. That's it. So it'll be interesting, man. We'll see. And like I said, the draft is on Thursday. We're almost here. The Texans hold the number 2 overall pick. We will see what they do with it. So much going around. I really am interested to see what happens there. who they take at that number 2 spot. They might surprise us all. We don't know. But yeah, thank you, Kay, for coming on and just giving us that insight into the Houston Texans. Their draft process right now, what they might be looking at this year, as we begin a new league year.
Appreciate it, Jaden. Always a pleasure.
Of course, man. And you guys, make sure you check out Cade's stuff there on YouTube. He's also on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, all those podcast platforms. And you check us out here as well. Same difference, YouTube and all those podcast platforms. We're going to be having you guys cover with everything with the NFL up to the draft, and after the draft. We're going to have Cade back on after the draft as well to recap see his reactions to his team's draft selections. I'm interested to see what that'll be. Hopefully it's a smile like we're getting right now, and not a frown. So, all right, Cade, we'll see you, man.
All right, man. Peace out.
You are.